Welcome to EPG Pathshala on the course of History and Ideologies of Social Work. My name is Murli Desai. I'm a former professor of Tata Institute of Social Sciences. Today's topic is Indian ideologies in the modern period and the first part of it. In this module, we will look at the modern period launched by the British rule in India and implications of British colonialism with specific reference to role of Christianity and the Hindu reform movements that resulted with influence of Christianity in India. Now we have discussed the modern ideologies of the Western world in details earlier. When the British arrived, before the British arrived, what was the situation in India and how the British rule with the modern ideologies influenced or made changes in the Indian scenario is what will be the focus. India's banking system was efficient and well organized throughout the country. It had a highly developed manufacturing base, exporting products to Europe and other countries. In fact, it was as advanced industrially as any other country prior to the Industrial Revolution. However, after the death of the King Aurangzeb, the last of the Mughal rulers, or kind of the second last, the Mughal rule had become weak and many independent kingdoms had come up. The European nation states were started trade with India, like with other countries, after Vasco da Gama found the new sea route to India in 1498. We jump to 1600 when the British merchants who were trading with India had formed a company called the East India Company. This gave opportunity to the trading British to interfere in the affairs of these weak kingdoms that had come up after Aurangzeb. The British at that time were politically much more advanced. As we discussed earlier, they had formed nation states and they were more nationalistic and aggressive. The parliament had more power over the king. Now, this nationalism gave them the impulse to expand trade and rule countries that were not yet nation states. The countries that they colonized did not still have nation states to have that strength to counter the nation states of the European countries. So what happens by 1767? The traders had become the rulers of India. The British rule brought about the modern ideologies and launched the modern period in India. We did discuss last time the impact of colonization all over the world with reference to Eurocentrism, secular hierarchies, imposition of the colonial state, deindustrialization and economic exploitation, destruction of pre-existing global system, imposition of individualism, etc. in all the colonies, so also in India. We will not repeat that here, but you can refresh up yourself and look up those notes from the earlier modules. Under the British rule, for the first time, India had to deal not with kings, but with a nation. We who were not nation ourselves. That British colonization brought about Eurocentrism, which means a construct that considered everything European as superior to everything non-European. Next, secular hierarchies, because the colonization was not fought mainly through wars. There were some fights and violence, but they were not wars. They fought and they could dominate these African and Asian countries, mainly through their modern ideologies of secularism, which made them more attractive to the local people who were bound by religion and caste and so on. So, but they did bring about hierarchies which were secular. For example, human beings over non-human beings, men over women, um, educated over non-educated, European over non-Europeans, and so on. They also brought about imposition of the colonial state. There was no nation state in these countries, not in India at that time. So they brought about this alien concept of a state which controls every part of your life. India already had a manufacturing base which was deindustrialized, and there was a lot of economic exploitation because the raw material as well as the natural resources of India were used by the British for manufacturing in England, and the products were again sold back to India. Colonization also destroyed the pre-existing global system where India had an edge. They also imposed individualism, whereas the Indian culture was more collectivistic at that point of times. Under the British rule, for the first time, India had to deal with a different kind of invader. These were not kings. India was used to invasions by one king or the other. But this was a nation. We who were not nation ourselves had to face with invasion by a nation. Let us look at the role that Christianity played with reference to colonization. In India, it's not the British who brought Christianity for the first time. The Church of the Christians of South India, known as the Syrian Christians, was founded by Saint Thomas, one of the apostles of Jesus Christ. And the earliest historical evidence of a church dates from 6th century AD, much before the modern period started in Europe. Later in the European countries, there was a close collaboration between the church and the state. And so the church played a crucial role in colonization. The church had its own agenda of spreading Christianity in the colonies. For the Portuguese who came to South Asia in the 16th century, religion was crucial for the construction of the colonial political community. Conversion to the religion of the rulers was the basis for social, economic, and political recognition of a group. However, it was not the same for the British when they arrived in India. Then why is Christianity important under the British rule? Let's look at the whole education system started by the Christian missionaries. At that time when they arrived in India, there were institutions of education which imparted religious knowledge, and that too only to the Brahmin children. Education was not available in a secular form to all the students, all the children of India. Whereas Christian missionaries, when they started schools, they kept the schools open to everyone. So more and more people started getting education in so-called secular schools, although run by Christian missionaries. This education exposed the Indians to the modern ideologies of rationalism, liberalism, and the values of freedom, equality, and justice. However, it also imparted the perception or the attitude that India had no culture worth the name, and that the Indians needed to remold themselves with the Europeans to be considered civilized. The British education and legal structures devalued the local systems of knowledge and jurisprudence and shaped new terms of discourse about society and what is good and bad. They also taught a new approach to religion. Christian missionaries not only started education in schools, they also did a whole lot of social services against illiteracy, disease, poverty, especially among the tribals and the Dalits. Their purpose was evangelism, conversion, but at the same time, call to service was very important. Both were inseparable. for the Christian missionaries. In doing this, the missionaries attacked the evil customs existing in India, such as child marriage, polygamy, female infanticide, sati, and so on. They tried to show how Christianity believed in the innate equality of all human beings and how it was free from the many superstitions and the rigid ritualism that characterized popular Hinduism. Now, what implications this had for India? Those who are getting educated into this modern ideologies, into the Christian way of practicing religion, there was a lot of introspection about what was happening within the religion in India. Values such as rationalism, individualism, humanism, embedded in the European society, began to take roots in India as well. The Hindu elites were led by the liberal ideas and the need for rationality in public life. Their first reaction was one of admiration and acceptance of everything Western. And repelled by some of the social customs and practices of Hinduism, many got attracted to Christianity, and some notable conversions took place in Bengal. Some educated upper caste elite perceived societal problems to have roots in religion and started working towards reforming it. Their argument was essentially to the effect that religion was fundamentally right, and what was required was only the shedding of the extraneous impurities that had entered into the religious life. So the efforts were towards revival of Hinduism, synthesis of religious faiths, and modernization of the religion that were considered necessary. Many reformers believed that cultural regression of the Hindus was due to the loss of the original Aryan qualities, which they shared with the Westerners. See, the whole exposure to Christianity had made the Indian elite very defensive about their religion. So either they would justify it or they would want to change. They borrowed the fundamental values from the Western worldview and tried to Christianize Hinduism. Notable social reformers, we will briefly look at what they did, and Raja Ram Mohan Roy is the most famous name in this movement. He was from Bengal and the first person to make efforts to defend Hinduism against the criticism of the Christian missionaries. And he was also aware that it is being debased from within through superstitions and ritualistic practices. He went back to the Vedic and the Upanishad thought for the purpose and established Brahmo Samaj in 1828 in Bengal. This institution worked for the emancipation of women and abolition of the caste system. Prarthana Samaj in Bombay was its offshoot. He introduced the ideas of organized religion, a sacred text, monotheism, etc. These basic ideas were what were taken from Christianity, that there should be one text and religion should be organized and one God. The religious and social reform activities that he began took root and set the pattern for similar activities in other parts of the country. Dayanand Saraswati is another key social reformer of that time. A Gujarati, he established the Arya Samaj in Punjab. His slogan was "Back to the Vedas," kind of similar to Raja Ram Mohan Roy. He also studied Vedas in details. Opposing the modernist view, he urged a regeneration of Hindus through adherence to pure Vedic faith. The chief objective of the Arya Samaj that he started was to bring about social and religious revival thought, which was called the Renaissance of the early Hindu doctrines. It worked to abolish the caste system, deny the monopoly of the Brahmins over the Vedas, and liberate women from a number of disabilities. Spread of education was a remarkable feature of the activities of Arya Samaj, which still exists today. Now, other pair of people very well known for revival of the Hindu religion were Sri Ramakrishna Paramhans and Swami Vivekananda. Sri Ramakrishna Paramhans preached selfless devotion to God and sought self-realization. He preached the old religion of India founded on the Vedas and the Upanishads and systematized in later commentaries. People who visited him were powerfully influenced by him. Many who had been completely westernized felt that there was something they had missed about the Hindu religion. Swami Vivekananda was his dynamic disciple who preached the teachings of his guru. While Ramakrishna was a mystic depending upon intuition and vision, Vivekananda was an intellectual relying mainly upon reason. He interpreted Indian thought impressively to Western peoples and provided a bridge between East and West. He founded Ramakrishna Mission, which adopted a comprehensive program of social services. Swami Vivekananda tried to Christianize Hinduism by 1. Attempting to cast it as an organized religion with an organized priesthood, church and missionaries, again similar to Christianity. Accepting the idea of proselytization and religious conscientization. Attempting to introduce the concept of one textbook, Vedas and the Gita. Accepting the idea of linear, objective and causal history, which was very different from the Hindu religious thought processes, which were more circular and not linear. Accepting of ideas akin to monotheism and accepting Puritanism and this worldly asceticism. Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar was a reformer with a little difference. He too fought institutionalized violence against Indian women, giving primacy to social reform over politics. However, his diagnosis of Hinduism did not grow out of feelings of cultural inferiority. It grew out of perceived contradictions within Hinduism itself. His was an effort to protect not the formal structure of Hinduism, but its spirit as an open, anarchist federation of subcultures and textual authorities which allowed new readings and internal criticisms. He sought to create a new political awareness which would combine a critical awareness of Hinduism as well as colonialism. Now, the overall approaches that were used by the reformers included the following. Apart from seeking a change in attitudes or values through a process of community education, a good deal of the reformist attention was devoted to seeking new legislation, which would either consolidate the changes already effected or help in bringing them about. For example, the law to abolish sati. Besides religious revival and translation of scriptures, setting up schools and encouraging education, setting up hospitals, care of the blind, deaf and dumb, orphanages, homes for widows, relief for the poor were the activities that they started. Full-time functionaries were necessary for the activities in the form of voluntary workers. And simplicity in their own personal life set examples for others. Besides this, also signing of pledges that I will not marry as a child woman, for example, no child marriage in my life, and so on. Some of them even married widows to bring about the reforms in widow remarriages. What were the implications of this Hindu reform movement in India? Let's see first the implications of the legislative reforms. In spite of reforms in legislation, the orthodox masses under the traditional lead of Brahmins and Pandits continued their old socio-religious practices. The legislation did not make an impact. It was observed that a reformist activity which is heavily based on law often becomes ineffective because a change in law which is not supported by a change in popular attitudes cannot achieve its goal. Construction of Hinduism, what do we mean by this? Until the British rule, India was known as Hindustan because it was a country beyond the river Hindu or Sindhu. Hindu was, another name for the river Sindhu. And people who followed the religion in India were called Hindus. These terms were given to India by outsiders to simplify the complexities of the religions, the plurality of religions in India. But the outsiders perceived Hinduism as a monolithic whole, as one religion. Although religions in India had evolved independently and did not constitute a single historically evolved religion. They imposed a conceptual unity on a plural empirical reality, and a secular identity was thus transformed into a religious identity. The reformers strengthened this construct of Hinduism based on Brahminism, which led to increase in the Hindu hegemony. The bunching together of all the indigenous sects and labeling them as Hindus was alien to the earlier tradition, where religious identity was by sect and the term Hindu was not used. Large number of religious practices in India did not follow the Vedas or the Upanishads, but now the Vedas and the Upanishads were considered important. These were actually more Brahmanistic oriented, but they were now considered the sources for the Hindu religion. Although none of these scriptures have used the word Hindu anywhere in their chapters. So, this social construction of Hinduism led to the notion of majority and minority communities based on religion in India, preventing the possibility of other kinds of classifications and identities. Let us also see what issues were not undertaken by the reformers. The reformers were against untouchability but did not touch the caste system. They were not against the caste system. They therefore could not deal with caste persecution. The Dalits started getting converted to Christianity because the Christian missionaries were open to accepting them. The problems of the poor and the rural were also neglected because the focus was on reforms in the religious practices. Now let's see what kind of opposition took place to the Hindu reformers. In the 1880s, a debate arose on whether social reform should precede political reform or vice versa. The orthodox opposition argued that the foreign rule alone was responsible for all the ills. The whole concept of nationalism had started rising in India. People were against the foreign rule in India. And therefore, this opposition to the reformers' work. They thought the reformers were playing into the hands of the foreign rulers who did not like the Hindu Indian cultural practices. And they were dividing Indians so that they cannot unite against the British rule. Lokmanya Tilak led the opposition to the social reform movement, which according to him would divide the mass support necessary for the nationalist cause. Let us summarize what we have discussed today. In this module, we identified the context and the implications of British colonization of India with reference to influence of the modern ideologies. We specifically reviewed the role of Christianity during the British rule with reference to education and a new approach to religion, which led to the Hindu elite wanting to reform their religion. Finally, we went into details of the context, approach, and implications of the Hindu reform movements that led to social religious reforms and construction of Hinduism. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy this history and find relevance to your work. Thank you.